It's disruption in the name of democracy. To hold their ground this weekend, pro-democracy demonstrators have been fighting back an angry mix of residents and people believed to have ties to criminal gangs, frustrated after more than a week of blocked roads and closed businesses. But Saturday night, protesters, including teacher Joan Holderfer, were energized and undeterred.
I want to see that my students have the freedom of thinking. It's not for just 1 or 2 days or 1 or 2 weeks. It is for the future of Hong Kong.
Protesters have faced tear gas lobbed by police trying to clear streets. They've protected themselves from pepper spray with umbrellas that have become a symbol of what's being called the umbrella revolution. At the core, these protests are about democracy, and specifically, they're about who can be on the ballot. In 2017, Hong Kongers can go to the polls to elect their chief executive, their top leader. But Beijing has decreed that any candidate must first be vetted by a committee that's loyal to the communist government.
This, of course, is what makes Beijing nervous.
American Michael Davis has been a professor of law in Hong Kong for nearly 30 years. We're talking about one election, 2017, years away. How important is this really?
It is really important because what they're witnessing over the past few years is a kind of dysfunctional government that seems to represent Beijing more than it represents Hong Kong.
Hong Kong was a British colony until 1997, when it was handed over to Chinese rule. It's governed by a policy called One Country, Two Systems, which allows some autonomy from China, grants legal freedoms, and on display here, freedom of speech. This push for democracy is the most public challenge to communist China since that other student-led movement in 1989, Tiananmen Square. A free democratic election could result in a Hong Kong leader with sympathies to the West. That's not something China's President Xi Jinping would like to see. Beijing's reaction to all of this is made clear in the Communist Party's mouthpiece, the People's Daily newspaper. It has published editorials that have called the protesters' goals a daydream and said that if these protests were allowed to continue, there could be chaos on the streets. So protesters are being careful to police themselves. They're helping each other over barricades, misting each other to keep cool, offering free food and even haircuts. They're being called the politest protesters in the world.
This is showing that we deserve democracy.
We met 27-year-old Barry Hoy manning a booth of donated supplies. You even admit that Beijing is unlikely to acquiesce to the demands of the protesters, so why be out here day after day after day?
Because all of us have one thing called hope.
Regardless of how this ends, some of the protesters are telling us they feel they have already won simply by raising this issue and taking the fight for democracy in China into the streets and onto the world stage.